Grace Thompson's hands trembled as she held the syringe filled with Richard Harrison's nightly medication. The same medication she'd been giving him for 3 weeks. The same medication that was slowly killing him. She'd just discovered the truth 30 minutes ago, hidden in medical records she shouldn't have accessed. And now she had a choice that would define the rest of her life. Give him the injection like she'd been doing, stay silent, collect her paycheck, and watch a man die. Or flush it down the toilet, expose what she'd found, lose everything she'd worked for, and probably end up in prison herself. "God forgive me," she whispered. "I didn't know." What happens when you discover you've been the weapon someone else was using to commit murder? When the person you're supposed to save is dying by your own hand? This is the true story of a caregiver who became an accidental accomplice, a billionaire who trusted the wrong person, and the impossible choice that saved one life while destroying another. Stay with me, because this story will haunt you long after it's over. Welcome to Voice of Granny. Before we go any further into this painful, beautiful story, hit that subscribe button. Some stories are hard to tell, but they need to be heard. You know what nobody tells you about caregiving? Sometimes the people you're caring for aren't the ones in the hospital bed. Sometimes you're caring for yourself, trying to survive while you help someone else stay alive. Let me tell you about 2 people who were both drowning, just in different ways. Richard Harrison was 68 years old and worth $8 billion. He'd built Harrison Global Industries from nothing, sacrificing everything for success. His wife died 20 years ago. His only son, Marcus, was brilliant but cold, shaped by a father who'd taught him that emotion was weakness and money was the only measure of a man's worth. Richard knew he'd failed as a father. He just didn't know how badly until it was too late. Grace Thompson was 53 years old and worth exactly -$127,000. Medical debt from her own cancer treatment 3 years ago. Her husband had left when she got sick, taking their savings. Her daughter, Maya, was trying to finish nursing school while working 2 jobs. Grace had spent her whole life taking care of other people, and now she couldn't even take care of herself. 2 people, both trapped by choices they'd made and circumstances beyond their control. And fate was about to slam them together in the worst possible way. Richard Harrison was running on the treadmill when his body betrayed him. One moment he was checking stock prices on his phone, planning his day, feeling invincible despite his age. The next moment, his left arm went completely numb. The phone clattered to the floor. The room tilted sideways. Richard reached for the emergency stop button, but his fingers wouldn't cooperate. He collapsed, his body sliding off the treadmill belt, hitting the floor hard. "Help," he tried to say, but the word came out twisted and wrong. Half his face wouldn't move. "Help me." He lay there for 7 minutes before his trainer found him. 7 minutes of terror, unable to move, unable to call for help, his brilliant mind trapped in a body that had suddenly become a prison. Massive stroke. Left side paralysis. Speech severely impaired. Dr. Sarah Chin delivered the news to Marcus Harrison, who sat perfectly still in the hospital consultation room, his face unreadable. "Will he recover?" Marcus asked. "Impossible to say," Dr. Chin replied carefully. "Some patients regain significant function. Others don't. The next 6 months are critical." Marcus nodded slowly. "He'll need full-time care." "Yes. Someone experienced with stroke patients. Physical therapy, speech therapy, medication management." "I'll handle it," Marcus said. After the doctor left, Marcus sat alone in that room for a long time. People think moments like these are when villains are born, but that's not true. Marcus Harrison had been shaped over decades by a father who valued success over love, who'd missed every birthday and graduation because of business meetings, who'd told his son at age 12 that crying was for weak people. Marcus had learned his lessons well. And now, looking at his father's empire, he felt something complex. Not quite hatred. Not quite love. Something colder and more practical. Opportunity. "Dr. Reeves," Marcus said into his phone. I need your help with my father's care plan. Yes, the private arrangement we discussed last year. I think it's time. What Marcus didn't know was that Dr. Reeves had a gambling problem that had cost him his medical license in 2 other states. What Marcus didn't care about was that the care plan involved medication combinations that would slowly, subtly ensure Richard never recovered enough to retake control of his company. Marcus wasn't planning to murder his father. He was just planning to help nature take its course a little faster. That distinction would matter later, but not in the way he expected. Grace Thompson stared at the eviction notice and tried not to cry. 30 days. That's all she had. She'd been behind on rent for 3 months, juggling which bills to pay, choosing between electricity and groceries, medication and transportation. The medical debt collectors called 5 times a day. Her daughter Maya was about to drop out of nursing school because they couldn't afford the tuition. Grace had worked as a nurse for 28 years. She'd held dying patients' hands, delivered babies, saved lives in emergency rooms. And now she couldn't even save herself. Her phone rang. Henderson Care Services. Grace, I have an opportunity, her supervisor Janet said. It's different. High-paying but unusual circumstances. How unusual? Grace asked, trying to keep the desperation out of her voice. Richard Harrison. The billionaire. He had a stroke. His son is looking for a private caregiver, someone who'll follow a very specific care protocol. The pay is $10,000 a week. Grace's breath caught. $10,000 a week. That was more than she usually made in 2 months. What's the catch? She asked. Janet hesitated. The medications. The son insists you follow the exact dosage schedule provided by their private physician. No deviations, no questions. And you'll need to sign an extensive NDA. Something felt wrong. Grace had 30 years of nursing instincts, and they were all screaming. But she also had an eviction notice and a daughter about to give up on her dreams. I'll take it, Grace said. That decision would save one life and nearly destroy another. The penthouse was obscene. That's the word that came to Grace's mind. Obscene wealth while she'd been rationing insulin for her diabetes. Marcus met her in the foyer, tall and perfectly groomed in a suit that cost more than her car. Miss Thompson, he said, his handshake firm and cold. Thank you for coming. Let me be direct about expectations. He handed her a thick folder. This is my father's medication schedule. Dr. Reeves designed it specifically for his condition. You'll follow it exactly. Every dose, every timing, no exceptions. Grace opened the folder and scanned the medications. Something immediately felt off. The combination of blood thinners and blood pressure medications seemed aggressive. The dosages seemed high. I should probably speak with Dr. Reeves about, she started. That won't be necessary, Marcus interrupted. Everything is clearly documented. Your job is administration, not consultation. Can you do that? Grace thought about the eviction notice. About Maya's tuition bill. Yes, she said. Good. One more thing. Marcus's expression hardened slightly. My father can be difficult. Angry. He may try to refuse medication or make accusations. His cognitive function is impaired. You'll need to be firm. Firm, Grace repeated. Ensure he takes his medication. That's the priority. Everything else is secondary. Marcus led her to the master bedroom. Richard Harrison sat slumped in a wheelchair by the window, staring out at Central Park. He looked smaller than Grace expected, diminished by illness and expensive silk pajamas that hung loose on his shrinking frame. But when he turned to look at her, his eyes were sharp. Aware. Afraid. Father, this is Grace Thompson, Marcus said loudly, like Richard was deaf instead of paralyzed. Your new caregiver. Richard's mouth worked, trying to form words. No, don't, want. The doctors say you need full-time care, Marcus continued, ignoring his father's attempts to speak. Grace will be staying in the guest room. She'll handle all your medical needs. Richard's good hand shot out, grabbing Grace's wrist with surprising strength. His eyes locked onto hers, desperate, pleading. "Help," he managed to say clearly. "Help me." Grace felt something twist in her chest. This man wasn't cognitively impaired. He was trapped, trying to communicate, and everyone was treating him like he wasn't really there. "I'll take good care of you," Grace said softly. Richard's grip tightened. "No, medicine, poison." "Father, stop," Marcus said sharply. "These paranoid delusions are part of the stroke. Dr. Reeves warned us about this." Marcus pulled Richard's hand away from Grace's wrist. "See what I mean?" Marcus said to Grace. "You'll need to be firm." After Marcus left, Grace stood alone with Richard, both of them trapped in different ways. The first week was hardest. Grace gave Richard his medications 4 times a day, following the exact schedule. He fought her every time, trying to knock the pills away, turning his head, attempting to spit them out. "Please, Richard," Grace would say, exhausted and patient. "You need these to get better." But he never got better. He got worse. His speech, which had been slowly improving according to the hospital records, started deteriorating. His mobility decreased. He slept more and more, sometimes 20 hours a day. Grace told herself it was normal. Stroke recovery wasn't linear. Patients had setbacks. But her nursing instincts wouldn't shut up. She started documenting everything in a private notebook. Blood pressure readings that seemed too low. Heart rate that seemed irregular. The way Richard's confusion seemed to peak about 2 hours after his evening medication. And she noticed something else. Richard was most alert, most coherent, first thing in the morning before his medications. Those were the times when he tried to communicate, his eyes desperate, his words almost making sense. "Medicine, wrong," he'd whisper. "Marcus, lying." "Your son loves you," Grace would say, trying to reassure him. "He's trying to help." But even as she said it, she wondered if she was trying to convince Richard or herself. Visual, Grace researching medication interactions on her phone, late night. Week 3, Grace couldn't ignore her instincts anymore. She started researching the medication combinations on her phone late at night. What she found made her blood run cold. The blood thinner and blood pressure medication, at these specific dosages and timing, could cause cumulative damage. Not fast enough to look like murder. Just fast enough to ensure someone never recovered. It was brilliant in its cruelty. Every dose looked medically justifiable on paper. But together, over time, they created a cascade of damage that would look like natural decline. Grace sat in her room, her hands shaking, staring at her research. If this was true, she'd been slowly killing Richard Harrison for 3 weeks. She was an accomplice to whatever Marcus was doing, whether she'd known it or not. Grace knew she should call the police. Report her suspicions. Walk away. But she had no proof. Just a feeling and some internet research. Marcus had Dr. Reeves, a licensed physician, backing up the medication plan. Grace was just a nurse who'd signed an NDA and was being paid an obscene amount of money to follow orders. If she was wrong, she'd lose everything. She'd be sued for breach of contract. Blacklisted from nursing. Unable to help her daughter. If she was right, she'd been poisoning a helpless man for 3 weeks. She needed proof. That's how she found herself in Richard's private office at 2 a.m., searching through files she had no right to access. It took her an hour to find Marcus's private safe behind a painting. Another 30 minutes to crack it using Richard's birthday and the company founding date. Inside, she found what she was looking for and what she wished she'd never seen. A contract between Marcus and Dr. Reeves. Payment, $500,000. Services, therapeutic care management with guaranteed outcome timeline of 6 to 12 months. Email printouts discussing accelerated decline protocols. A life insurance policy on Richard, taken out 2 months before the stroke, with Marcus as sole beneficiary. $50 million. And worst of all, a second medication schedule. The real one. The one that would have actually helped Richard recover. Marked with a note in Marcus's handwriting, discard. Use Reeves' protocol instead. Grace stood in that office, holding evidence that Marcus had been systematically murdering his father, using Grace's hands to do it. She heard footsteps in the hallway. Looking for something? Marcus asked, his voice deadly calm. Grace's heart stopped. She was holding the documents. The safe was open behind her. There was no way to explain this away. I know what you're doing, Grace said, her voice stronger than she felt. I know these medications are wrong. Marcus stepped into the office and closed the door behind him. Do you? He asked. And what exactly do you think you know? You're killing your father. Slowly. Using me to do it. Marcus smiled, but it was cold. That's a very serious accusation. Do you have any idea what happens to caregivers who make allegations like that? Especially when they've been administering the medications themselves? Grace felt ice in her stomach. He was right. She'd given every dose. Her fingerprints were on every pill bottle. I have evidence, Grace said, holding up the documents. Evidence you obtained by breaking into my private safe, Marcus countered. That's burglary, Grace. And given your financial situation, it looks a lot like you were planning to blackmail me. He moved closer. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to put those documents back. You're going to continue my father's care exactly as prescribed. And in 6 months, when he passes from natural complications of his stroke, you'll receive a $100,000 bonus and excellent references. And if I don't? Grace asked. Marcus's expression went completely cold. Then I'll report that you've been stealing my father's pain medication to sell. I have security footage I can edit. I have a doctor who'll testify you were acting erratically. And I have your signed NDA acknowledging you were solely responsible for medication administration. He leaned in close. You have a daughter in nursing school, don't you? Maya? It would be a shame if she had to deal with a mother facing criminal charges. Hard to finish school when you're visiting prison every week. Grace felt her world collapsing. He had her trapped completely. So what will it be, Grace? $100,000 and a clean slate? Or destroy both your lives over an old man who's going to die anyway? Grace sat on her bed holding Richard's morning medication and thought about her daughter. Maya was 23, brilliant, compassionate, everything Grace had hoped she'd be. She wanted to be a pediatric nurse, to help children the way no one had helped her when she was young and sick. If Grace went to the police, Marcus would destroy them both. Maya would never become a nurse. Grace would probably go to prison as an accomplice. But if Grace stayed quiet, she'd be murdering a man. Slowly. With her own hands. Some choices don't have good options. Some choices only have versions of loss. She found Richard awake, staring at the ceiling. When he saw her with the medication tray, his eyes filled with resignation. He'd stopped fighting. He thought she was part of it now. Richard, Grace said softly, setting down the tray. I need you to listen to me very carefully. She pulled out her phone and opened the Notes app, typing as she spoke. I'm going to ask you questions. Blink once for yes, twice for no. Can you do that? Richard blinked once, confusion and hope flickering across his face. Does Marcus want you dead? One blink. Yes. Did you change your will recently? 2 blinks. No. Does Marcus have access to your company accounts? 1 blink. Yes. Grace's hands shook as she typed. Do you want me to stop giving you these medications? Richard's good hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, squeezing with desperate strength. 1 long, emphatic blink. Yes. God, yes. Please. Grace looked at the medications in her tray. Looked at Richard's pleading eyes. Thought about her daughter. Thought about her own soul. Okay, she whispered. Okay. But if I do this, everything changes. Marcus will know. And things are going to get very bad before they get better. Richard nodded. He understood. Grace picked up the syringe filled with the morning medication and walked to the bathroom. Richard watched as she emptied it into the toilet and flushed. I don't know how we're going to survive this, Grace said, tears streaming down her face. But I can't keep poisoning you. I can't. Richard's eyes filled with tears too. He reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. For the first time in 3 weeks, they were on the same side. Grace became an actress. Every day, she prepared Richard's medications exactly as prescribed. She brought them to his room on schedule. And then she threw them away and gave Richard diluted saline solutions or crushed vitamins instead. It was terrifying. Marcus or Dr. Reeves could show up at any moment. Security cameras could catch her. Every syringe she emptied could be the one that ended her life as she knew it. But within 3 days, Richard started improving. His speech became clearer. His color improved. He stayed awake for longer periods. His hand grip strengthened. It was working. Grace had been right. Marcus came for his weekly visit and immediately noticed something was wrong. He looks better, Marcus said, his eyes narrowing as he studied his father. Stroke recovery is unpredictable, Grace replied, keeping her voice steady. Sometimes patients suddenly improve. Marcus walked to Richard's bedside. Father, how are you feeling? Better, Richard said, the words surprisingly clear. Marcus's jaw tightened. He turned to Grace. I need to see his medication log. Grace handed it over, her heart pounding. Everything looked perfect on paper. Every dose recorded, every timing exact. But Marcus wasn't stupid. I'm bringing Dr. Reeves tomorrow for an evaluation, he said. We need to make sure this improvement is sustainable. It was a threat, barely disguised. We don't have much time, Grace told Richard after Marcus left. Dr. Reeves will know something's wrong. He'll check your blood levels, and he'll realize you haven't been getting the medications. What do we do? Richard asked, his speech still labored but functional. We need to get you out of here, Grace said. Somewhere safe where they can't touch you. And we need evidence. Real evidence that can't be dismissed. Richard's eyes went to his desk. Computer, he managed. Files. Grace helped him to his wheelchair and rolled him to the desk. His good hand trembled as he opened his laptop. Password? Grace asked. Richard spelled it out letter by letter, Marcus. His son's name. Even after everything, even knowing Marcus wanted him dead, Richard's password was his son's name. Grace felt her throat tighten. Together, they searched through years of emails and financial records. They found the paper trail, Marcus embezzling from company accounts. Marcus forging Richard's signature on documents. Marcus planning the takeover for years. He's been preparing for this, Richard said sadly. Since he was young. I taught him money was everything. And he believed me. Grace squeezed his shoulder. We need to download all of this. And we need someone on the outside who can help. Elena, Richard said. My assistant. 20 years. Trust her. Grace found Elena Rodriguez's contact information and sent her everything they'd found, along with a simple message, Richard is in danger. He's being poisoned by his son. Please help us. We're running out of time. Then they waited. Dr. Reeves was exactly what Grace expected, polished, professional, and utterly corrupt. He examined Richard with practiced efficiency while Marcus watched from the doorway. His improvement is remarkable, Dr. Reeves said, frowning at Richard's chart. Almost too remarkable. He turned to Grace. Miss Thompson, you've been administering the medications exactly as prescribed? Every dose, every day, Grace said. Dr. Reeves pulled out equipment to draw blood. Let's run some tests. Just to make sure everything is in order. Grace felt panic rising. The blood work would show Richard hadn't been receiving the medications. She and Richard were about to be exposed. That's when the doorbell rang. Elena walked in with an elderly black man in an expensive suit and 2 uniformed officers behind him. "Richard!" Elena called out, rushing to his side. "Thank God you're okay." Marcus moved to block them. "This is a private residence. You can't just—" "Judge William Carter," the man said, showing his identification. "I have an emergency court order for a wellness check on Richard Harrison based on evidence of elder abuse and attempted murder." He handed Marcus legal documents. "These officers are here to ensure no evidence is tampered with while we investigate." Marcus's face went pale. "This is insane. My father is receiving excellent care. From a physician who lost his license in 2 states for medical fraud?" Judge Carter interrupted, looking at Dr. Reeves. "Yes, we know all about Dr. Reeves." Dr. Reeves was already backing toward the door, but one of the officers blocked his exit. "Richard," Judge Carter said gently, approaching the wheelchair. "Can you hear me? Do you understand what's happening?" Richard's eyes filled with tears. "William," he said, his voice shaking. "Thank you." "Did your son try to harm you?" the judge asked. Richard looked at Marcus, and for a moment, the room held its breath. "Yes," Richard said clearly. "He was killing me. Grace saved me." Marcus's expression crumbled. Not with anger, but with something more complex. Shame. Grief. Recognition of what he'd become. "Father, he started. "Don't," Richard said, his voice breaking. "Just don't." The police found everything. The safe with the contracts. The falsified medical records. The life insurance policy. Dr. Reeves's payment records. They also found Grace's hidden notebook documenting every day, every symptom, every suspicion. "Miss Thompson," Judge Carter said, "you took an enormous risk. Why didn't you come forward immediately?" Grace looked at Richard, then at the judge. "Because I was scared," she admitted. "Because I'm broke and desperate and Marcus had all the power. Because I thought if I accused him, he'd destroy me and my daughter, and I'd still have no way to help Richard." "So what changed?" the judge asked. Grace's voice was barely a whisper. "I realized that living with myself mattered more than protecting myself." Marcus Harrison's trial was national news. The prosecution had everything: documentary evidence, testimony from medical experts, Grace's detailed records, Richard's own testimony. Marcus's defense tried to argue diminished capacity, claiming he'd been driven to desperation by a cold father and impossible expectations. And here's the complicated truth: they weren't entirely wrong. "I failed as a father," Richard said from the witness stand, his speech still slightly impaired but understandable. "I taught my son that success was everything. That emotions were weakness. That money was the only thing that mattered." He looked directly at Marcus. "I created the man who tried to kill me. That doesn't excuse what he did. But it explains it. And I have to live with that." The courtroom was silent. "Marcus," Richard continued, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry. For every birthday I missed. Every time I told you to stop crying. Every time I chose work over you. I'm sorry I taught you the wrong things. And I'm sorry that by the time I learned what mattered, it was too late." Marcus sat at the defense table, and for the first time in the entire trial, he broke. Tears ran down his face as he looked at his father. "I wanted you to be proud of me," Marcus said, his voice cracking. "Just once. But nothing was ever good enough. So I stopped trying to be good and started trying to be powerful. Like you." "I know," Richard whispered. "And that's my failure, not yours. But the law doesn't care about whose failure it was." Marcus was convicted on charges of attempted murder, elder abuse, fraud, and embezzlement. He was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. Dr. Reeves got 12 years for his role in the conspiracy. Richard sold most of his empire. He kept one small foundation focused on elder care and caregiver support. Grace received a settlement from Harrison Global's insurance that paid off all her medical debt. Maya finished nursing school with a full scholarship Richard created in Grace's name. And Grace continued as Richard's caregiver, but on different terms. As family. "I don't understand why you stayed," Richard said one afternoon as they sat in his new modest apartment in Brooklyn. "After everything. You could have left." Grace smiled. "Because you apologized. Because you changed. Because you taught me something important." "What's that?" Richard asked. "That being wrong isn't the same as being evil. That trying to make things right matters, even when you can't undo the harm. That we're all capable of both terrible and beautiful things, sometimes in the same lifetime." Richard took her hand. "You saved my life twice. Once from the medications. And once from dying without understanding what I'd done wrong." "You saved mine too," Grace replied. "You taught me that survival isn't the same as living. That sometimes the right thing costs everything, but it's still right. Now here's what makes this story different from the fairy tales we usually tell ourselves, my friends. Marcus Harrison isn't just a villain. He's what happens when we teach children that their worth is measured in achievements instead of character. Richard Harrison isn't just a victim. He's what happens when we spend our lives building empires instead of relationships. And Grace Thompson isn't just a hero. She's what happens when desperate people face impossible choices and somehow find the courage to choose right anyway. The truth is messy. Grace almost didn't make the right choice. She came this close to staying silent, to being complicit, to letting a man die because she was scared. Richard created the monster that tried to kill him by being the kind of father who confused success with love. And Marcus. Marcus is sitting in prison right now, and part of him probably still believes his father deserved what happened. There are no clean endings here. Just real ones. But here's what I want you to remember. Grace Thompson made $10,000 a week for 3 weeks poisoning a man. That's $30,000. And she threw it all away the moment she realized what she was doing. Most people wouldn't. Most people would rationalize it, justify it, convince themselves it wasn't their responsibility. Grace made the harder choice. Not because she was a saint, but because she couldn't live with herself if she didn't. And Richard? He used what time he has left to rebuild his relationship with his son through prison visits, through honest conversations, through finally being the father Marcus needed 20 years too late. It won't fix what's broken. But it matters anyway. Look around at the people in your life. The ones you've overlooked. The ones you've underestimated. The ones doing invisible work while you're not paying attention. They see you. They know your truth. And sometimes, they're the only ones brave enough to save you from yourself. But also look at the people you're raising, the people you're teaching, the people you're shaping with your words and actions. Are you teaching them that money is everything? That emotion is weakness? That power matters more than people? Because if you are, someday you might create someone who believes it. If this story moved you, if it made you uncomfortable, if it challenged you in ways you didn't expect, I need you to do something right now. First, subscribe to this channel. These stories matter. The complicated ones. The ones without easy answers. The ones that make us think about who we really are. Second, leave a comment telling me, have you ever faced a choice between doing what's right and protecting yourself? What did you choose? I promise you, I read every single comment, and your stories matter. Third, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Someone working in caregiving who feels invisible. Someone struggling with impossible choices. Someone who needs to know that courage isn't about being fearless, it's about being terrified and doing the right thing anyway. And if you know someone elderly or vulnerable, please check on them. Make sure the people caring for them are doing it with love and integrity. Make sure they're safe. One phone call could save a life. Because Grace Thompson's story teaches us that one person paying attention, one person choosing courage over comfort, one person refusing to look away, that can change everything. Richard Harrison lived because Grace wouldn't let him die. Marcus Harrison sits in prison, but he also gets weekly visits from a father who's finally trying to understand him. And Grace? She learned that her worth isn't measured by what she owns, but by what she's willing to sacrifice for what's right. That's all for today, my friends. Remember, the most important choices we make are usually the hardest ones. And the people who save us are often the ones we almost overlooked. Until next time, keep your eyes open, your conscience clear, and your courage ready. You never know when you'll be someone's last hope. Subscribe button. Have you faced an impossible choice? Tell us in the comments. Next.